Somehow, I don't know, like a cat landed on my feet.
Is that a sin?
I forgot that. I kind of forget that I'm being recorded too. I'm like, blah, 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 blah.
So we are today in the studio of Jane Hughes, a Helsinki-based artist from Ireland originally.
Yeah.
And you can tell us more.
So yes, I'm originally from Ireland. I've been living in Finland for the last 5 years. I left Ireland when I was 22 and moved to Berlin. I first came here to do my master's in 2009. I did 1 year of it here in then Teich, and it was called environmental art. And the second year I did in Berlin in this art and context in the University der Kunst. And then I kind of came back for half a year to finish. It was like 2012, and then I moved back to Berlin. So it's kind of a little bit tricky, I think, well, you did it, to kind of stay after your master's, like to kind of figure out how to navigate Helsinki. So I think a lot of people might return to where they were before, and I was still really like living in Berlin, and yeah, so then I kind of moved here in 2018, the end of 2017, so I've been here now like 5 years, and yeah, I did my bachelor's in Ireland. Went straight from secondary school as a 18-year-old into the National College of Art and Design, and never looked back. That was it. Then went into the painting department in NCAD in Dublin, and a few months after graduation moved to Berlin and tried to carve out.
How did you choose Berlin to go there?
I did an Erasmus exchange in the third year of art college in Dublin to Aki in the Netherlands. Me and my friend who's also in art college with me in Dublin, we hitchhiked to Berlin, and I was just like, wow, this place is amazing. And the driver, she was a dancer and a performer, and in her 50s, and she was telling us all sorts of like the best places to go and things to discover. A year later we came with the art college in Dublin as a class trip and to see all the exhibitions and things like that, and then I was like, okay, next time I come I want to live here. I don't want to have to leave again. And that was that. Then I went 6 months after art school. I didn't know anybody in Berlin, and just
and how did you choose afterwards to move to Helsinki if you were so in love with Berlin?
It was a little bit impulsive decision, maybe. I was just looking around for masters that would be in English, because I thought doing a academic thesis and masters in second language would be fairly challenging, especially in German. So I found this environmental art just from searching on the internet, and I applied to Helsinki and then got accepted to Teich when it was then, and I was in a cafe talking about it, and I was like, okay, should I go, should I not go? Never been to Helsinki, don't really know anything about the program, don't know anyone there. Which is much like how I ended up in Berlin, and somehow, I don't know, like a cat landed on my feet. But yeah, then I also overheard a Finnish person overheard me, and she came over and she's like, sure, go for it. I study there, it's great. Like, you know, there's loads of things like opportunities and good facilities, and it's totally worth it. So I was like, okay, fine, off I go. And yeah, it was, I'm still here now, but I did go back and forth a lot. But it was definitely like a big contrast to Berlin as well as a city.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot less people here to begin with, and
yeah, and it's a lot cleaner, and they had a lot more money and equipment. There was just rooms full of like Apple computers, and in Berlin and UDK they just don't have the same resources. So it was maybe like one computer that you had to book, and it was like waiting weeks, and here you have like such high-end equipment that you can borrow, and dedicated staff for that. And I think it's just there's more resources in that way.
How did you choose environmental art?
I kind of wanted a bit more like working with other people, working with other artists, kind of this collective creativity, and doing kind of more group work rather than being on my own in the studio or organizing things. Like I worked in a lot of collectives in Berlin where we organized exhibitions, we hosted artist talks, or we ran a gallery, or did group evenings where we cook and show films and things like this. But I wanted to like be in the making process with other people, and the environmental art kind of advertised itself as sort of a fusion between kind of public art and urban design and very open masters that seem to kind of maybe collect
That's interesting
people.
because when you say environmental art, I somehow think about sustainability and ecology
So,
or something.
yeah, and I guess I thought there would have been more of that on the course, but in the end, I think it was kind of loose, maybe what direction you took. So there wasn't really specific courses in sustainability or ecological practice, but there was sort of environmental art, history, kind of looking at how people might do guerrilla gardening or certain different kind of actions, or the history of land art, you know, and the happenings from the 50s and 60s and this kind of things.
Yeah, and you're still doing some community activities with the Helsinki Art Walk, for example.
Yeah. So a friend of mine recommended me for that job when I first arrived. She does some guiding, and they asked her, and then she was like, "Oh well, I don't have time at the moment. Maybe you would be interested." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, that sounds nice." And I've been doing it for 5 years. I really enjoy it. It's a nice way to see a lot of exhibitions and to meet a lot of artists and kind of get an overview of what's happening and to go a bit deeper, because I think you might go around and see some shows, but now, like, because of this, and I really read every artist statement, every press release. I might check their website. Yeah, it's interesting as an artist to do it, to see these kind of different approaches people have and how you can represent them to an audience, a mixed audience. And also often the artists come along as well, like they might be present, like you were, in the gallery if they have time.
That's how we met. I had this screening of my video in Forum Box, and then you came to ask questions.
Yeah.
So I'm giving the favor back now, asking you questions. Yeah. How did you decide to become an artist in the first place?
I don't know. I guess it's also like, do you make a conscious decision? I guess.
Or did you just flow into it?
Yeah, I guess when I was a child, I really, I have memories of being around 3 or 4 and just like playing around with paint. My mum let me like go wild with the garden furniture, like some old white plastic tables. So I was like pouring paint all over them and painting them. Like the page quickly became too limiting or something. So I was really, right, let's make concoctions and pour them everywhere. I found it always quite enjoyable as a kid, even though my mum wasn't really, into painting or drawing herself. My dad did some life drawing lessons, so he was showing me a little bit. So I think I had a little bit of that interest, like a lot of kids do, like, I'm going to be an artist when you're like 4 or 5. But I think then when I was a little bit like around 12 or 13, I was like, oh, maybe I should be an accountant, because like my brothers were maybe a bit older than me and they were going that direction. So I was like, oh yeah, is that the responsible thing to do? But I quickly lost that notion, and I think when I was around 16 or something, then I did this portfolio course in Dunleary Art College in Dublin for 2 weeks in the summer, and then it was just really like, okay, this makes sense. When you're interested in a lot of things, I think people from the outside don't realise that being an artist isn't just drawing what you see or painting what you see. It's trying to kind of encompass, or for some people at least, it can be trying to encompass a lot of like philosophy and psychology and emotion into this kind of form, in its very kind of like concrete and abstract way, that you want to kind of add so many elements from so many aspects of life. So I think if you're like, I don't know, because I'm not an engineer, but if you're an engineer, maybe you have a certain kind of parameters that you work within, whereas I think if you're a writer or an artist or musician, those parameters are really wide, and a lot of it's kind of constantly kind of editing out and trying to find kind of more interesting things. And I think when you're kind of beginning, you maybe start with the kind of like, okay, identity and who am I, and like a lot of students kind of start kind of with that, I think, and then you're kind of like, okay, what's my really niches as you dig deeper and deeper, and what kind of things kind of make you curious. And like I get excited by textures and crumbling buildings and reading strange history stories, and yeah.
What are you working on right now?
What am I working on right now? So I just had a solo show in TM Gallery, the Painters Union Gallery in Helsinki. So a lot of my energies went into that for the last year and a half or so. So now I feel like I'm kind of stepping back a little bit. Some applications and seeing what directions and what locations maybe I might do some exhibitions in the future. We've been doing some group shows together here in the studios. So we just had one in Longa in February, and now we have one right now in Asbestos Art Space, which has been nice to work as a group, and there's always a lot of work that goes into organising those kind of shows as well. And yeah, a few things coming up in the summer. Virila Kessa, the summer exhibition near Salo, opens in 17th of June to the end of August. I'll have maybe 4 or 5 paintings in that. 35 artists. And then in Karina, not too far from there as well, there's Kusiton Cartano. It's also an art manor house. I'm going to be have 2 paintings in a exhibition there in August called Stop the War. So it's a kind of war-themed artworks. We'll see what else comes up. I've applied for a few things, and yeah, I need to get back into the making phase slowly.
You have something interesting there.
Yeah, so okay, sorry, with the making phase of the works then, so one of the directions I think I will pursue from the recent works where I've been kind of focusing on textures and a lot influenced by, in 2021, the summer, I had this residency in Arsena Art Centre in this Irish-speaking island. Just the textures, here's some seaweed I collected there. So I ended up getting very interested in all the rubbery, slimy seaweed that was washed up amidst the crackly limestone black rocks. I'd initially thought I would work from some kind of old photos or old stories from the island, but this like visceralness of having these materials in front of you, and there was no access to the library. I think it was closed for the summer, and there's just nothing else there. There's not like secondhand bookshops there's nothing. So then it was really kind of becoming one with the landscape, and I was collecting, so this kind of textures is one element I want to pursue, and maybe making some kind of large wall installation where you can touch the artworks. And another side project is that I've been collecting these sins for 2 years, which I just started in Gallery Ars Libra in Kuopio, where I had a show in May 21.
This is not a sin, it looks like a bird box.
Yeah, so this was my kind of attempt to make a little confession box that you could put the sin in here on coloured paper. So and then I tried printing the sins that I collected on different materials. So on wood.
Stalked people on the internet for hours and hours.
There you go.
Is that a sin?
Well, that's what some people write. Well, in the end, I think maybe sin isn't probably the best word to use. I think also it became quite open, like transgressions, or, like people just kind of confided things, I guess, that they wanted to get off their chest. The initial starting point for this was reading about the 17th century collection of sins by this French priest for the forgetful sinner. So there was a book. So before you went into confession, you could check this book in case you didn't know what to confess.
Forgetful sinner?
Yeah. And I thought that was kind of a pretty hilarious idea. And then in Ireland, it's been a pretty Catholic country. We had to go to confession as a kid. I think it's totally crazy. Around the same time, and I think that was also quite a big influence, was this mother and baby report was all over the Irish news, and it was coming out about the kind of influence of shame in Irish society that the Magdalene homes, if you don't know what they are, that was these laundry homes where women who were unwed and pregnant were forced to go to have the baby, and they were funded by the state, but they were run by religious institutions. So they were run often by nuns, and usually the women were treated really badly and the children and the babies were treated really badly. So a lot of babies died of malnutrition because they were seen as babies of sin. And the women were treated as sinners and, like as less than, because they were unwed and they got pregnant. It didn't matter what the circumstances of that pregnancy was. And so often against their will, they were placed in these homes, and some people were never left. Because if a relative didn't come and take them out, they might never leave. And people were hugely traumatized, of course, as well. Like their babies were taken away from them. They weren't allowed to hold them. They didn't know where they went. Some of them were sold to the state. So there was a lot of things were coming up about all the kind of corruption and secrecy And how, you know, it was easy to blame the priest and the church, but also the community allowed it to happen too, and it was often also the parents, or, you know, so it was a kind of whole country's guilt basically of how did it happen.
Do you have some specific routines or actions that you do when you come to work to the studio? Like, how do you get into the process?
I generally don't have a coffee at home in the morning. I have my porridge and green tea, and then from April to October, I cycle to the studio, so it's about 12k, which is really good for my mental space and health.
And physical shape.
Yeah. So that really kind of helps, I think, just having that kind of cycle to just, like, I don't know, open up your oxygen levels. And then when I get to the studio, I reward myself with a coffee. And I either, like, when I had the exhibition coming up and I really need to get into the visual space, I tried to do a lot of blind drawings. So I tried to do like really short drawings for the first like 30 minutes and even time them so they're like 20 seconds. And if I was working from a lot of photographs from rock pools from the West Coast, and I was just doing really, really fast sketches of them and faster and faster, so they're getting more and more abstract. So I did that for a few weeks just to have a pile of images to break any connection too much to the photo and to make them more surreal and more like less brain work, you know, just more like instinct and kind of, because I guess you can relate as an artist, you know, your head sometimes just gets in the way if you overthink of like, okay, should it be this way, should it be that way? There's endless options to paralyze you from making. There's always like so much ways to second guess what you do, and I was running out of time. I had only a couple of months before the show, and I definitely needed to produce, because there's so much of this invisible work, which I guess a lot of artists know, but maybe people outside the artist profession mightn't know, that, you know, so much is writing, you know, writing proposals, writing funding applications. But even when you have the funding applications, you still need or have funding, you still need to have places to show. So you're still proposing for exhibitions, and one exhibition will fly by and then you need to do it again. And then there's so many things also to that kind of like, there's like candy, a residency in Paris, or a residency in Iceland, and to do an exhibition there would be nice. So there's a lot of things that kind of distract you from the actual making. And then I try to start painting by at least 10:30 or 11, so that I kind of get 2 hours of painting in. And then generally here in the studios we have a lunch break together at 1, which is a kind of a really nice pause. Unwind, because I think when no one else is here, I'll have a 10-minute lunch at my laptop checking some things. It'll be really quick. But if other people are here, then it's like, oh, okay, what are you doing? Oh, how was your weekend? Oh, did you see that show? Oh, okay, that's coming up. And you just kind of get more ideas or hear about what other people are doing or what shows are on, and then coffee break, and then back here, and maybe I work from 2 till 6, maybe 7 if it's like some kind of deadline or something like. But I don't rarely work till later than 9 or something like that. I'm not really a nighttime work.
What are the main themes in your work?
I think this kind of crumbling old houses has kind of been in my work for the last maybe 15 years in a way. And I grew up in a house in the countryside that was crumbling. A very old house built in the 1600s. So it had a lot of like creaky floorboards and dead trees and lots of nooks and crannies and big old barns and a lot of things to kind of ignite your imagination as a child and terrify you too with like ghost stories. So it was like an old Jesuit priest who came and told us ghost stories and haunting old buildings. And I think Berlin has that as well. And you see the bullet holes from World War II and missing buildings in between old Altbau. And it has a lot of this rich history in the textures.
But Helsinki doesn't have that.
Helsinki doesn't have it as much, no, but you have it in like the old wooden houses a little bit, villas that have been decaying, because there's a lot of old countryside houses here as well that have just been sort of abandoned, and wooden houses are left to rot. But maybe it's more this icy landscapes, I think, has a similar kind of mysteriousness, you know, like this very, very kind of harshness that kind of exists here in winter. Or also this twilight time in summer, in midsummer, I think also has like a kind of ghostly, otherworldly feel compared to other places in Europe. I don't know, would you agree coming?
Definitely the big extremes of like non-stop light, and then the other extreme of the non-stop dark.
Yeah.
It's something unique here. It's definitely not south of here. It's not like that.
I think the light, you know, this kind of purpley, midnighty blue, like where like even now at 10 o'clock, it's kind of a very faint, it's not dark anymore. And then I think in midsummer, it's just this very like strange blues in the sky that I feel are very kind of enchanting and have this kind of.
I think that's also because
otherworldly-
the sky seems very low here, because I guess the angle that the sun rays come,
Yeah.
it's a bit different.
Yeah.
And then that creates a little bit of a different atmosphere.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I just that kind of color palettes I think from here are quite inspiring, and then this kind of textures, but also maybe a ghostliness and then otherworldliness, and whether it's like space or like the moon or like under the water. I was sort of reconnecting a little bit with these kind of remote spaces, which I've always found kind of interesting. Like in 2009, I did an artist residency in Iceland. And this kind of, the Iceland landscape is so surreal for me. I find it very inviting and strange. Being in this residency in 221 in Inisheer, I think I got kind of reconnected with that interest of these sort of very severe and unusual landscapes. Colour is always a big element in my work, and trying to find unusual colour palettes. This little pink one up there is called Melting Ice Cream Caps. For me, it's like a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek title. That was an exhibition in this Porvo in this Vanha Capelizentalo with a little light under it. So I was crystallizing seaweed. I tried to do some experiments with crystallizing the seaweed in large tanks, and they unfortunately went moldy. Well, I was looking at the social history in these books, and I've always interested in sort of human psychology and the way the world works and how people have evolved and how beliefs have evolved. And so I think I was trying to approach that by using kind of found photographs and little snippets of stories and putting them all together to make these kind of abstract narratives. And now I'm trying to do it with textures in paint instead of actual figures. But I think I might try to like combine both maybe the next time. I don't know. We'll have to see what happens. So I've still been collecting the old photographs, but maybe just not focusing on people. Like I love all the colours in this. Like the textures in those stones. And we have these kind of stalagmites and stalactites in the Burren region in Ireland, so I visited them as well when I was there. And then I kind of make like, these are all quite messy, but I did a lot of like, you know, quick sketches and then sort of partnered them up in various ways. So it might look nothing really like the original photo, but that kind of neon green moss was very nice, and then there was a slight peachy pink colours in here. So then I might just choose to exaggerate things. These bubbly textures I think are really nice as well. So yeah, these are all sort of part of those kind of quick sketches, and then I'd like make notes. Maybe okay, this I'll scale this up to be whatever 100 by 120 centimeters. And sometimes things just don't work. You know, it doesn't matter how nice the image was, you just can't make it look right in a sketch, or maybe it looks nice at this scale and then you scale it up and it doesn't work.
I was going to ask you if you go to exhibitions often, but I guess with the Helsinki Art Walk it's just inevitable.
Yeah, I do go to exhibitions a lot with the Helsinki Art Walk for sure. And then also just Helsinki art scene is quite small, so I feel like a lot of friends are very active, so it's also really nice to see their work and go to those shows. And yeah, I think there's just a lot to see. So, and I've, you know, friends working in a lot of various museums as well. It's often a side job for artists, so they're like, oh yeah, there's a great show in Taidahali, come and see it. And most weeks I think there's some opening I would go to.
What are your favourite places?
Ooh, I think architecturally, Forum Box I think is one of the most beautiful gallery spaces, because it's also this lovely old factory.
It has the
space.
textures that
Yeah,
you see.
yeah, and the high ceiling, and yeah, I think it's very charming space. And of course the people there are super nice. There's so many. There's like a lot of great galleries. Amma Gallery has always got great paintings and lots of interesting work. Helsinki Contemporary, and have a Forest Bloom, there's always the big contenders, but also like Gallery Huto I think is brilliant, and it's a really nice that it's like this artist run, like there's over 100 artists. It's a really big community. Also like Forum Box. Kotta Space, I think, has really good shows in Kalasatama, and it's nice they're there for 2 months. Also Porvo, I think, has really nice spaces, like this Vanha Kapelaisentallo. Yeah, and this Asbestos art space is actually now in a really like nice location in Kruunenhaka. Yeah, I think there's a lot of galleries, and there's like all the artist associations. This TM gallery, of course, is really great, and there's Painters Union, yeah, and Gallery G, Hippolyte, Sculptor. Like, I think there's a great scene, and then you have great organisations like Publix, kind of that have a shape that are kind of mapping out the Finnish scene as well, which is great. So I think there's a lot happening here. There's also enough as well, because before I was in Berlin, and there's like, it becomes a marathon then when you want to try and check out even just one part of the city.
Maybe a few words about the studio. You have a lovely studio.
Okay, about my studio in particular, not the collective.
I mean, the whole collective is great.
Yeah.
But also, your studio is pretty spacious.
We were really lucky, like before we had the space in Itapasila, and it was Helsinki city offices, and they had just left a lot of the furniture. They left a lot of lovely old shelves, like this wooden shelf here, this giant table here, these Lundia shelves they had left. My lovely partner Taffany built these lovely canvas racks for me, very kindly, and also this on wheels canvas rack there. We also built these walls here because it was brick behind it, so it was very hard to kind of drill in, so that I have I can easily, drill in holes to hang paintings at different levels. My lights kind of need to be fixed a bit, but they're daylight tubes, so it's even. A nice painting table, also made by Taffany for me, which is very kind. Sofa also from Helsinki City, from their last space. So it's always, I think, important if you can fit one in to have some relaxing space in your studio.
What's your favorite kind of element in the studio? What do you like about it the most?
I am a kind of, I don't know why, but I've become a kind of storage nerd. So I do really like having all these shelves, and I would like to have, I kind of like to have the same size box that I could label. And I would like to have higher ceilings, so I could have 2 racks. In the last space, I could have 2 racks. So I kind of like to have a very well archived space, because I think the longer you're making stuff, the more kind of a clear archive you need.
I'd say your works are very well situated. You obviously store all your art here.
Yeah, basically.
Or do you have some other storage space? So
there's maybe a few things in my mum's house in Ireland, but I took everything from Berlin now, and so basically everything's here.
Okay, lastly, but not in importance, what are some other places of inspiration for you? Other artists that have impacted you somehow?
Of course, there's many. What comes to my head now is Mamma Andersson, a Swedish painter. I really like her work. She's done Magnus Carlsen Gallery in Stockholm. She also works a lot from old photographs, and it's kind of, her work is kind of steeped in history. She's a lovely colour palette, kind of mixing a bit from the Swedish landscape. And I think she did a show in Louisiana as well, in Denmark. Marlene Dumas, I had the pleasure to see her work in Venice last year. Beautiful painting show, lovely documentary about her as well, talking about her work. And I also just really like her portraits, are very evocative, and I feel they have a lot of emotional resonance, which I would aspire to as well through her colour palette. And Nan Golden I just saw in Stockholm as well. The slideshows were amazing. Also, I loved her when I was 20, and so it's nice to kind of revisit that work again and be like, it's still really powerful. There's lots of Finnish artists I also like Alina Brothers' work. I also saw that in 2004 in London before I ever knew anything about Finland. And Peter Doig, a lovely painter.
I will list them, I will put them in some sort of a way that would be accessible, so that, because to me it's always interesting to know what kind of things inspire other artists.
I also thought, I was saying before we started, that this Louisiana channel from the Danish Museum and this talk art, this podcast is quite good as well.
Talk art I have not heard, but I will check.
Yeah.
Well, Jane, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I could probably continue, but I know that you have to go soon, so I'm kind of constantly worried about that.
It's okay. It's okay. It's no problem.
But yeah, very nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks very much.